So, if you haven't heard, a lot of Northerners are quite upset about Rishi Sunak's latest budget, namely because the areas that are in desperate need of financial investment have essentially been ranked second or just put right to the back of the queue, while, shall we say, Tory areas, indeed the more financially affluent Tory areas, have basically been given money which they themselves, even the Tory councillors, are confused about because they don't actually need the money. And again, this is being disguised as, quote, levelling up the North. But of course, as we said before many times when this was first bandied about, I'll believe it when I see it. And I said I didn't have a big chance that it would actually happen. And of course, it actually hasn't happened. In fact, it's happened almost exactly the way that I said it would. They would basically not spend the money, spend it not where it's needed, or basically not give enough money, and it basically be a token to the North. And almost all three things have happened at once in this case. So today we are going to talk about the Town Fund and essentially how it's being used politically by the Tories to essentially keep hold of Tory areas. Again, not too surprising. But before we jump into today's article, please do remember to hit that like and share button. And of course, down below there is a link to my Patreon page and a one-off donation link. And as always, thank you to all those people that do support me that way. So, this comes from the Yorkshire Bylines. Title is Pork Barrel Politics and the Towns Fund. On the 4th of March, it was widely reported that of the 45 towns to benefit from the Chancellor's initial affections for the Towns Fund, about 40 were in the Conservative-controlled constituencies. In this post-budget press conference, George Parker of the Financial Times asked the Chancellor if this was pork barrel politics, using government money for local expenditure that benefits the local politician. In his denial, Rishi Sunak maintained that the funding followed a needs-based assessment and was according to formula. Neither of these claims are true. In his response to the Financial Times question, he said this: "The formula for the grants and payments for a new fund is to give them some capacity to bid for projects and is based on an index of economic need which is transparently published by the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government, and based on a bunch of objective measures." He then went on to say that the funding announced in the budget was for helping towns struggling with bidding to receive more help in preparing bids. In this statement, Sunak is muddling two separate elements of the town funds and two different funding allocation systems: capacity building funding and the much more substantial Towns Fund allocations. So, dealing with the first, capacity building, all the 101 regional towns identified in a glossy prospectus for the £3.6 billion funding were eligible for funding. This funding was distributed according to the objective formula based solely on population size, and a large authority of up to 225,000 residents was eligible for £173,000. The economic need had no bearing on it. This funding was to support feasibility studies, drafting plans, writing business cases, identifying for potential private investors, engaging and negotiating with investors, developing and implementing stakeholder engagement plans. This part of the grant-making process took place last year. So, the grants announced on Thursday were for the main part of the Town Fund, primarily capital expenditure of up to $25 million for each town. The additional funds was according to a range of criteria, which we will discuss below. But for the Index of Economic Need, which is transparently published by the Ministry, this Index of Multiple Deprivation, or the IMD, is not mentioned in the criteria. Not only does a town fund exclude the poorest in the country, of who mostly live in cities, but there is no objective index of need to determine which towns are to receive the funding. The criteria for funding has been perfectly designed to ensure that the better off benefit at the expense of the poorest. So the government doesn't even require a town to be deprived or its residents impoverished. So to apply for the funding, according to the guidance, the most important factor is the quality of the town investment plan, which prioritises ambition, project management and local collaboration. The town's investment plans are assessed against three major decisions: impact, strategy and partnerships. Index of need is not even on the criteria. Need is a subsection of impact and is understood as the major challenges and problems to which the town could be addressed through the town fund investments. And the required information about that is needed as follows: details of unemployment, income levels, deprivation and well-being, low-level unemployment, details of town transport challenges, town centre vacancy rate and footfall, business growth challenges, land development challenges, skill shortage and low educational achievement, crime and antisocial behaviour. So this first mention of the deprivation forms a small part of one bullet in the section of 8 elements which constitute half of one of the 3 dimensions. It could not be clearer that the judgments made about funding eligibility for funding have very little to do with deprivation or even an index for need. The other half of the need dimension is called the scale of opportunity, but the government doesn't even consider this to be an opportunity to close the gap between the current situation and the ideal. Instead, there are opportunities available to the private sector about how attractive these might be for investors. This alone is likely to preclude the poorest local authority areas that already struggle to attract inward investment. Sunak's answer indicated that there has been a fair and open allocation about the funding according to some objective criteria regarding to need. This is evidently not true. Not only is it not true, but the criteria on which the funding is based is heavily skewed towards advancing the interests of already advantaged conservative parochial towns with low levels of deprivation. There is no need for pork-bellied politics when the funding process and the criteria can be designed to ensure that the poorest are always excluded. And this is what we've, then this is what was meant to replace the EU funding. And the EU funding was based on the index of needs, so it went to the poorest areas, and the poorest areas got it. And we've talked so much about in the past about how many towns relied on that EU funding to help keep them afloat, to help them, do things in the town. That money is now not only gone completely, but has been replaced by this town fund, which basically is designed to not even give them a single penny. So we have to ask the question of what on earth is going to happen to these towns, and the simple answer is it's going to get even worse. And remember, most of these towns were the ones that voted for Brexit because over the past 10 years, primarily due to austerity, things have been getting worse and worse in these areas. And the only thing that was helping to keep these areas afloat or even do things was that EU structural investment fund. And that, even my own town has benefited hugely from this, to a point where just outside the town hall, there's this little, almost I don't know what you call it, like this black marble plinth. And on there is a plaque on it saying that the development fund, the improving of the Barnsley Town Centre, was helped by the European Investment Fund. That money ain't there anymore. So, if people think that Brexit is somehow going to make their lives better or improve the area where they live, as we've always been saying, how can you trust these people when these were the exact same people who rigged the system and have now rigged it even more in favour to favour their areas. And here's the thing, I saw one person comment on this on another video of why don't these poor people just move to these more affluent areas? First of all, moving implies the cost in self just to move. Second of all, you've actually got to be able to afford a home in these areas. And trust me, in these more affluent areas, these homes are not cheap, let alone being able to rent is not cheap in these areas. So the idea that, you know, poor people could just move to these more, you know, areas that are getting all this money and investment is just absolutely physically impossible, and just would be, you know, economically impossible for many of these people to do, which is why, hopefully, like I say, next election, these guys are going to get royally booted. Fingers crossed. So, as always, please do remember to hit that like and share button, and of course down below there is links to my Patreon page and a one-off donation link. And as always, thank you very much for watching, and thank you to the people who do support my channel through the links below, or just simply click the like and share buttons. And we'll see you all next time.